Hello, everybody. Hi, everyone. We will just wait maybe 1 minute until our audience can join. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this live session with Teaching English with the British Council. So we are here again for the community Q&A questions, and today this is Wiam, and today I am joined by André and Georgia. Here we go. Hi, André. Hi, Georgia.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. Georgia and André joined us before for the mini event, and we talked about such an exciting topic last time. And we were saying that how much it complements each other, because Georgia, you talked about the heart or maybe the feelings more, but André, you talked about the brain, the science of learning, and how we can understand the brain more to inform our teaching or to understand our learners better. We have, let's see, our audience. We have Rashna saying hi from Rashna, Vida. So if you have any questions for André and Georgia, or if you're interested in learning more about the practical side of the brain and the emotional side, activating learners' emotional knowledge and also tapping into their prior knowledge in the brain, or all these activities or strategies can help us better understand our learners and also understand our teaching, so that it's more strategic and fitting for the purpose. So if you have any question, please leave it in the Q&A and we will try to answer it. Maybe we can try first, if you can just maybe André and Georgia, if you remember just one activity that you would start usually the classroom with to engage your students in that, tapping into their emotions and tapping into their prior knowledge, how we can activate those things in students and why is it important? Maybe you can start with Georgia, yes?
I was going to say thank you very much, William. I
Go
really
ahead,
like
Georgia.
what you said. I really like what you said about the brain and the heart. And we were talking backstage before we went live. We were talking about how the two sessions complemented each other. André, you are the brain of the show. So what kind of activities would you choose with your students?
I think maybe Andre, can you hear us? Maybe he has a delay, but we can wait until Andre is
For some
back.
reason, my connection again is not working. Well.
Oh, we can hear you now, Andre. Okay, maybe you can start with you, Georgia. Yeah.
So one of the things that we talked about in the session was little mental breaks for the students as well. Something that you can combine with English is little pronunciation activities that you can work with your students in terms of intonation and stress. So for example, you can get your students to say a simple word like hello and say the word hello in different ways. So for example, try it yourself at home as well. Try to say hello as if you were talking to your best friend. You would say, hello. But if you were talking to your boss, you would say, hello. Or if you were talking to a young baby, you would say, hello. So these little mental breaks help your students activate not only their English knowledge, but also their emotions. They're nice little mental breaks that you can use in class as well. So try it at home, why not? And of course, give us your ideas about what little breaks and what exercises you use as well. I can see one member of our audiences Rachna, I'm really sorry if I'm not saying
Yes,
the name right.
we can see Rashna, who says, usually I use more dialogues, observation, and tacts to tap on their prior knowledge and emotions.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah.
I
And
like,
if I may add something, because
yes, go ahead, Andre. Yes, Andre, can you hear
yeah,
us?
okay. I hope you can hear me now. I think yes. So I was just going to say that it's really essential for you to activate your students' prior knowledge, especially considering that your students will have learned something that connects to the new content you're about to teach. You know, at some point, they know something that will be useful. And I've actually read research showing that the more you can do that, the more you can help your students activate what they already know, the better for them to actually learn the new input you're giving them. So this is really essential. I would say at the beginning of every lesson, try to give your students a couple of minutes and ask them questions. You can do a quiz. You can ask a thought-provoking question for them to think, pair, share. There are many ways you can do that, but really don't skip that because that's very important, right?
Yes, it's very important points, and here we have this comment, which I think uh, from Roshna again saying brain motivation and anxiety are interplay, or maybe at interplay, because what you've mentioned,
Yeah.
Andre, is yeah, the brain side, and Georgia, you mentioned how you can, activate that, emotion inside of them by using imagination. So,
Absolutely.
do you think
Exactly.
this does reduce the anxiety for learners, or does it increase motivation? Maybe.
I think that part of understanding our learners is helping them understand themselves. And as Andre was saying, little activities at the start of the lesson helps them feel psychologically safe. And also, for example, little things that you can do, as we said, like brain breaks that will help them understand what it means to feel frightened, for example, or nervous. In the session, for example, that we did with the British Council and Teaching English was little brain breaks that help the students understand how to feel nervous. For example, if I ask you at home, and Andrea, feel
Yeah.
free to join me if you'd like. If I tell you
Sure, let's
with
do
your
it.
hands, so with your hands, show me strong. Show me strong. How would you show strong? You would do something like this. Exactly. If I ask you to show me
Yes.
gentle, how would you do gentle? So you would do something very
Yes.
light as well. But if you ask your students to do something that means nervous, how would you do nervous? Exactly, yeah. So these are, Andrea, you're fantastic. And these
I'm doing
things,
this from behind the screen, so
Yeah,
amazing.
great.
you did manage to engage us. But some people would think that these are separate things. I mean, brain,
Yeah,
heart, or emotions, but they are very much in line together. Would you agree?
they are. They are. And as a matter of fact, I know people like to think about the heart as the seat or the home of emotions, but the heart actually just pumps blood, and the emotions are in the brain. You know, and it's an analogy. It's poetic convention, so to speak. You know, we talk about brain and heart, and I love that actually. You know, I've read a lot of books and novels about that distinction between brain and heart. But if you look at inside what's going on inside your brain, there are many structures or regions of your brain that have something to do with emotions. There's one that we've referred to as the limbic system, and that has a very important connection to emotions. And again, We know that your cognition is affected by your emotions. Your emotions are also affected by your cognition. So we cannot take anything for granted. We have to respect both, right, Georgia? So otherwise, if you don't help your students connect or use your emotions in the right way, they will not engage because they will not be interested. They will not have any reason to do what you want to teach them. So emotions are actually the beginning of the whole process. And you have to make sure your students are there emotionally with you. Otherwise, they might be thinking about a problem they have at home. Their memories might be full. So yes, emotions and cognition, they cannot be separated, you know?
Exactly. And I think that it's very important to consider that sometimes our students come to our classrooms because they feel safer in our classrooms than they feel at home. Regardless of what we teach or how we teach, sometimes the students come for connection to our classrooms. So the first step of the conversation in understanding our students starts with emotions, because our students, when they don't feel, let's say, psychologically safe, they might go into the fight, which is a very aggressive behavior in class, or the freeze mode. The freeze mode is when they disassociate and they don't engage. Or they might go into a flight mode, which is they just try to escape all homework. They try to just, again, not create connections. But when you try to facilitate a psychologically safe classroom, this is when you engage, right? What do you think, Andre and William?
Perfect.
I think these are
I
all
couldn't agree
very
more.
great.
Yes, and I think,
Yeah.
just to add something to what Georgia said, I think everybody here, or most people, must be familiar with Krashen's effective filter. So it has to do with that, lowering your students' filter so they feel safe, and also the idea of establishing rapport with your students. Because if, like Georgia said, if they're in that FFF mode, the fight, flight, or freeze mode, they will not learn very effectively because they're really concerned with survival, really. So that's an evolutionary aspect of the brain. So it's very important for you to connect with your students emotionally and make them feel safe. Otherwise, they will not learn very effectively.
Mhm.
Exactly. And it is about how we connect with the students. And it doesn't have to be all the time heavy. It doesn't have to be very emotionally stressful for the students. Little activities that you can do in class. I think it must have been Carl from the comments who said that I ask my students their likes and their dislikes. Little things that you can do. Even when you do revision, you can do something I like calling a knowledge splash, which is little bits of knowledge that they can share with each other. For example, what did you learn from the world today? It doesn't have to be something related to English, something that they can share with each other. Even in groups of teenagers, for example, you can ask them, if they have access to a mobile phone in class, you can ask them, why don't you share something that you saw online, or someone nice that you follow, for example, on social media, something that will help them connect and understand each other as personalities.
Yes. And if I may add something to that, I think this works really well as a brain break, as a chance for your students to really disconnect or unplug from what you're teaching, because that goes hand in hand with the idea of cognitive overload. And I think those moments for connecting, socializing, interacting with your peers, with your teacher, without really thinking about the content or the lesson itself, they're very important, not just to establish rapport, as I said, or to connect, to actually to make it a safer environment, let's say, but also to stop thinking or focusing on what you are learning, because this is going to help you learn better. We know from research that you should probably shift from the focused mode of thinking into the diffuse mode of thinking more often, for your brain to make those deeper connections. And that's a very good way to do it. A brain break. Just take a little break, do something, engage with someone, interact with someone, and that will help you learn better, more effectively. Yeah.
Absolutely right.
I'm going here to one of the comments, which also, because you covered some activities which are really, I say, are helpful in the classroom and they are very low prep activities actually. They don't take much time, but they're very good to discharge that maybe brain load or emotional load. And here I think it's mentioned about something about imagination. There's a comment. I think imagination is an important point to teach a language. But I'm going to this point because I think imagination has that ability sometimes when you imagine. It's not as a real encounter, so you are not re-traumatizing them, but actually using that imagination to tap into their creativity. Um, Maybe you can explain to us, maybe from the brain perspective and the emotional perspective, why imagination or imagine that you can say this while, as you demonstrated, Georgie, in the previous activity, like say this
Yeah.
sentence with this emotion. So this is kind of tapping into imagination.
Most definitely. May I start, Georgia? Yeah.
André, you're the brain. Let's go for it.
Good. Well, I'm the brain, you're the heart, you're the emotions. We work together, and I think one thing I can mention about imagination that is quite interesting is there was a social psychologist. Actually, we might consider him as a cognitive psychologist as well, and his name was Albert Bandura, and he wrote about self-efficacy, which is a very interesting term to help us understand how we can make our students more autonomous, more driven, let's say, or agents of their own learning, self-efficacy. So at self-efficacious students, they know what they have to do. They're more metacognitive. They don't need so much support because they can find themselves and find a way to get things done. And one of the things that has been recently added to this framework of self-efficacy is visualization, and that has to do with imagination. So how do you become more self-efficacious? Well, there are many things you can do. You can try something, be successful, and then you become more self-efficacious because you tried it, it worked, and then you go, okay, I can do it. Or you can look at someone who's never done it being successful, and then you go like, okay, if they can do it, I can probably do it as well. There's verbal persuasion as well, but visualization is something recent. You can imagine yourself doing something, being successful at something, and that will help you actually be successful. So this is visualization, and it's a very important tool that we can teach our students. So think about how would it feel to be successful at this task. How can you imagine yourself actually achieving or completing this? Because this will give your students a lot of insight into how they can actually get it done, and it might help them get it done. So that's the idea of visualization and imagination.
This is brilliant, André. I didn't know about self-efficacy, you said?
Yes, self-efficacy by Albert Bandura. Yes, very interesting framework. Yeah.
This is brilliant. I've been recently playing around with the idea of empathy mapping, which is an idea that helps the students understand what I say in relation to what I think and what I do. So, how we connect things that people say, why they say them, are there any other reasons for saying these things, and what they end up doing. So, for example, if your student comes to you and says, I don't like this class, I hate everybody here. So we just need to do a little bit of empathy mapping, understand what triggered this reaction, and also understand if there are any underlying reasons why the student is saying these things. So, for example, would it be something that happened in class with another student? Would it be because they're nervous or anxious about something that happened at home? So empathy mapping helps you truly understand any other reasons that are taking place in their minds in relation to their emotions as well. So this is why the brain and the heart always need to be taken into consideration. So I would definitely suggest, please go and watch Andre's and then my session as well, because
Yes.
it's a nice, as we said backstage, it's a nice complementary sort of session, all of these together, that will
Definitely.
help us understand our learners.
We have lots of comments coming from our audience. And there's this question from Teresita asking for possible classroom activities to enhance the functional literacy of the learner. Okay, maybe, yeah, functional literacy, but maybe we can connect that more to maybe science of learning from literacy perspective,
Yes.
or what are maybe some of the emotional barriers for young, or here it's not young learners, it's adults or older
Exactly.
students,
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Well,
maybe does not give them that,
yeah.
confidence to speak or to use the language.
Yeah. Well, one thing I can tell Teresita is that we actually read differently from what we think we read, according to the science of reading. And I think one of the greatest authors nowadays is a French neuroscientist by the name of Stanislas Dehaene. And he wrote Neurons in the Brain. Actually, the reading neurons, or Reading in the Brain. That's the name of his book. Yeah, Reading in the Brain. And he talks about an area that is actually very close. So this is the temporal lobe, the left temporal lobe for most people, has a lot to do with language processing, and very, so if you go down a couple of inches, very close to your ear in the back, so you have something called the brain's letterbox. And according to the latest research, we learn how to read by decoding letters, not words, So we don't read at the word level, we read at the letter level. So we actually learn how to read individual letters and phonemes, and then we put everything together. But as we become quite fluent and proficient, we do it very quickly, and it feels like we're reading word by word, which is not true. So one thing we can do to help people read better is to help them with the decoding process, and looking at the letters and how they combine with other letters and what phonemes they make, so that they can become more fluent. And this is especially important when you're teaching a second language, an additional language, because phonemes can vary greatly between languages. I speak Portuguese, Georgia speaks Greek, and you speak a lot of other languages, but we all speak English. And that two letters combined in English can sound completely differently from our own native language. And it's important for us to master that, so we can learn how to read more fluently. So that's one of the things I can tell you. And there are many activities you can do. The science of learning will tell you one thing, and then I will ask Georgia to complement. Repetition is very important, even though I understand that we feel like, okay, students, they don't want to do things again and again and again and again. But the brain only really learns, when we repeat things, and not just repeat things on the same day. But when we space out our revision sessions, there's something in the science of learning called spaced repetition. So we have to go back to things we're learning on a certain, frequent basis, let's say, so that it becomes long-term memory. That's called memory consolidation. You hardly learn anything by looking at it or doing something just once. It almost never happens, because we have to sleep to consolidate memory. So we have to go back to it. So remember, repetition is your friend. It's not your enemy. You just have to vary how you repeat things with your students, right, Georgia?
Absolutely, André. First of all, thank you for recommending the book, Reading in the Brain, you said. So I'm definitely going to look this up. And as André was saying, repetition is extremely important, and we can do repetition activities in many different ways. What I would suggest also, apart from repetition, is connecting with the materials. And I will give you an example. Usually, I'm the first person to say that if there's one thing I absolutely hate teaching in class, is environment related topics. not because I am against these topics, but because sometimes the course books might be outdated. Sometimes the materials might not help the students connect. However, if you help the students connect with the topic itself, something that relates to their community, then this is what will help them associate and enhance their functional literacy. And I remember that some years ago, if I'm not mistaken, Harry Waters was doing a project with his class where the students had to write a letter to a local authority about littering. And that was brilliant because the students learned so much in terms of their English skills, but also they connected with the materials and something that was really truly valuable to them. And you can do that, for example, in your classes too. You can help your students connect with the materials by doing project-based tasks. For instance, they can create a fake, if you want, or a real podcast where they can just discuss matters that are very important for them and their community. So repetition and connection are truly valuable.
Yes, I couldn't agree more, Georgia.
We have a comment here from Imad, I believe. This is not true, completely wrong. This is a complete misunderstanding of the science of reading. It is not only about decoding and repeating. I think we
Yes.
were focusing on just two important aspects of that, but it doesn't mean that this is the only thing that the brain does, decoding, or this is the only way. I think the more we process the letters, as far as I know, is that we see it as an image, so that helps us later in decoding.
And if I may add something, because I think I understand where he's coming from. I'm talking about the very basic foundational skills for literacy. So it's not that, at a higher level you have to, focus on that too much, but maybe that's where the problem is stemming from. I think a lot of people forget, and this has a lot to do with the science of learning. A lot of people forget that for you to be able to learn something new, you really have to have that foundational knowledge that comes from, the very basic elements of whatever it is that you're learning. Just to quote a friend, a neuroscientist, Jared Cooney Horvath, I'll give a very quick example so we can move on. How can students be creative with language or with reading, for example, if they can only be creative with language or whatever they're learning if they have enough space in their working memory to associate their prior knowledge with new information, and then they can use that in very creative ways. The only way for them to do that is if that decoding process, or the basic information that they need is recorded in their long-term memory. Because if it's not, and we say, okay, go do some research, go on Wikipedia or Google and find out about this, and then you can, well, then whenever they go find something, whenever they go look for new information, that becomes new memory. And that occupies space in your working memory. And then you don't have space left for you to manipulate and handle that information connecting with your prior memory or long-term memory. So that's why what I'm saying really is master the essentials first, master the foundation. And then you will become much more fluent, proficient, and much more operational or functional with whatever you're trying to learn. That's the idea.
Exactly.
Thank you, Andre, for clarifying that. Lots of great comments, and we have, how teachers use it. So different ways. So here, Rashna is using a shoebox, repetitive reading, identifying objects. There's also here linking syllabus topic to the students' community and creating a podcast sounds terrific. I like that too. Georgia, we were talking earlier about the differences between generations these days, and we have Gen Z and millennials. We also had a few posts on our social media on that. So I've been noticing from our community or from the comments coming that also there's a difference in generations, how they process things around them, or maybe the the differing environment for learners these days makes them more emotionally vulnerable or more reserved. But yeah, we talked about these differences, but it would be really interesting to hear from you, from the heart, mind, and from the brain side as well.
Thank you, William. And we were talking actually backstage just to let the audience know that we're talking about the different generations and how they connect with their emotions. So, for example, we millennials focus a lot on our emotions. We are one of the first generations to talk about mental health, and we are one of the first generations to actually go to therapy or to actually talk openly about how we feel. Gen Z, there is a different shift. We have started noticing that the Generation Z might not fully connect, not because they don't want to, but because they haven't learned how to connect with their peers in the same way that we did. And if you think about it, when we were children, we didn't have all this access to the screens, to social media, to TikTok, for example. We had our toys, we had our true connections, and we are truly the last generation that grew up without the internet as much as the newer generations.
Yeah.
And now we see Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and the following generations who cannot really connect because of their connection to the online world, to the online community. What do you think, Andre?
Yeah, so speaking about the online community and the internet and the new generations, I think there are good things and bad things. As you said, we are trying to express ourselves more. Now, I mean, not us, because we come from the previous generation, right, Georgia, right? Even though we should probably express our emotions more often. We find different outlets to do that. And I think kids and teenagers who have access to the internet and social media, they do that through social media quite a lot. Now, this can be very bad if that prevents them from going out and actually engaging in the real world with their peers, with their friends, because that's very important for cognitive and emotional development, not just doing that from your computer or mobile or anything like that, but actually being physically present and interacting in that medium with other people. So that's very important. But on the other hand, I think that we can learn how to use those tools to help our students who have never been heard before, who felt neglected, for example, to have a voice. So there are a lot of students who are very shy and introverted who found on those platforms like escape valve or something that actually allows them to be themselves and to learn according to their own pace. That's very important. So we have to find that balance, because nowadays I'm more concerned than optimistic, I would say, because I think we're using too many digital devices all the time. But we're trying to replace that human factor that is so important for cognitive and emotional development,
Yeah, which is a really absurd reality, because the same tools that are allowing us to connect more are making us maybe more reserved. So it's a very good point to think about. And I find in my classes that also connecting with topics that are familiar to students. So maybe instead of, you mentioned, Georgia, the podcasts, so maybe things related to trends on TikTok, but maybe redoing it in the class, that can also make them feel engaged and seen. Because if this is their world, then I think as much as possible we need to accommodate to that, to those ways of learning and knowing for them. Maybe just the last question from the audience. So here it's about having a very big class. So when you have a lot of students and maybe as a teacher you feel overwhelmed by that number, is it easy to activate students' learning through heart and brain, or how can we maybe handle that in the classroom?
Go ahead, Georgia. That's yours. This one, I'll
We can
add
answer
a
it
few
from
comments.
our perspective. So I will answer it
Yes.
from the perspective of the heart. So from the perspective of the heart, it is important to identify patterns, because we did talk about how technology and how our learning are changing because of technology, but it's still very important to train ourselves in identifying emotional patterns. So yes, when you have a class of 50, the true connection happens when you divide them, for example, in groups, when we see the dynamics of the classroom. So try to start identifying patterns. Are they missing, for example, their homework? Are they refusing to participate? Are they slow in communication? These are patterns that you can start recognizing in order to see how you can connect better with them. So yes, it will take longer, definitely, but the whole idea is to split them, try to understand different groups, how they work together, try to understand the dynamics of the classroom. So this is from the heart. But what about the brain,
Yes.
Andre?
What about the brain? So I'm going to use the same word you chose, patterns. Very important, you know. So during my webinar, I talked about universal principles of learning that apply to every brain, but also there are some individual tenets, let's say, that vary from person to person. And I think if you have a classroom with 50 students, you can assume that there are many things that all of them need to learn because they're universal, but also there are many, many different things that they need individually in order to learn. And if I can give you a couple of examples, starting from universal principles, everyone is everyone needs attention to learn. Without attention, there is no learning, because the stimuli from your lesson, from your voice, from your slides, from your board, they won't get into your students' memory system. So you need to get everyone's attention. That's very, very true. But the way in which you get someone's attention may vary from how you get someone else's attention because of their prior knowledge, because of their interests. They have different interests and likes. So I think I'm going back to the heart here. Find out what your students like, what they dislike, so that you can always think about those things when you're trying to engage them. But there are things that are universally engaging. A quiz is usually universally engaging because everybody wants to find out the right answer. So if you start with a nice question or a quiz or something like that, you immediately engage your students because they want to discover what's coming. It's like an enigma, and we like things like that. Also, as I was talking about repetition, and I think some people say, well, repetition, yes. Instead of repeating information, so you've just given them input, you've just taught them new vocabulary or grammar structure or something like that, have them repeat that, but in a more active way. So we have a name for that. This is a pattern we should respect more often in the class. It's called retrieval practice. So you've given input to your students, allow them maybe 1 or 2 minutes thinking on their own to repeat that to themselves without any help, so that they can say, okay, I think this is what I learned. Tell someone else, get together, think, pair, share. There are many ways you can do that, right? I'm not telling you exactly what to do, but I'm telling you, respect the patterns, the universal principles, and the individual tenets. And if you find the right combination, I'm sure your lesson is going to be more effective. That's the idea, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's thank you so much, Georgia and Andrea. And I wish I could carry on with this conversation, but we're over time. And I think many of us today are leaving with fresh ideas that we can take straight into our classroom, from emotional chickens maybe to more memory boosting activities. So thanks everyone who joined us live or is watching the recording. We'd love to hear what you try out and how your learners respond. Until the next time, keep teaching and keep learning, and see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.